You're listening to the REITE Club podcast, where the focus is all about helping you grow your real estate investment portfolio and live the life you want to live. Come grow with us and join our community at thereiteclub.com. And now your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.
So it seems really interesting. So you're basically taking a piece of land, you're either repurposing it, making it its best use possible for a builder to say this is, worth way more because you've spent the time, you spent the money to get it ready so that somebody can essentially take it and start building. What are some of the steps? Because I know this is not really a topic that we often talk about, right? I mean, the BRRRRs, there's steps, the buy and hold, there's steps, and there's steps to development. From the acquisitions to, I think you talked about the soil testing and just different things like that. Are you able to share just an overview of the things that you do if you had to summarize each step?
Sure, yeah. So when you're going to acquire a property for land development, you really want to take a big part of it is your due diligence. So when I go in and I put a property under contract, I literally go in, if I believe that it's a very good prospect for me to do a development on it, I put it on the contract right away, meaning like I put an offer into the seller. And the reason for that is because I spend a lot of my due diligence time and effort into figuring out next, like, is it going to be something that I'm going to move forward with or not? And if I'm going to spend all that time to do that, I don't want somebody else snapping the property, at the same time. So if I have it under contract, the due diligence part, I gotta say, is probably the 95% of the work that you have to do upfront. And the due diligence means creating the concept, figuring out what is the highest and best use for that property, creating the concept based on that, pre-consulting with the city. So having a pre-consultation meeting to submit your proposal and present it to them. They come back with a lot of feedback and letting you know what it is are the studies that are going to be required for you in order to obtain the approval for that specific proposal. A lot of times in the due diligence, we're doing our ESAs, so environmental site assessments. Phase 1, if it's a commercial property, which most of ours is phase 2 environmental, which means drilling into the ground to assess the soil. You definitely want to check for any contaminations and things like that. You want a geotechnical report. The geotechnical will mean that you have to know the stability of the soil. So all of those studies actually get done during the due diligence process, because if you do an environmental, for example, and it comes back as contaminated land, well, you're gonna have to bring those costs up, right? So your project is gonna be more expensive, or it may not even make it sense to do it at that point, depending on how much contamination it is. So this is all part of the due diligence, but like I said, land development requires a lot of capital upfront. And yes, a lot of people ask me, so you do all of these reports, you pay the money to do it, and you might not even move forward with the project? Yes, we do. We could spend $50,000 just doing these reports, depending on the size of the project. But you could spend $50,000 doing these reports and decide that, you know what, it's just not beneficial for us to move forward. It's just kind of a part of doing the business. And like you said, Sarah, it's not for the faint of heart. I totally get it. But it's so important to do this because otherwise you could get yourself into a lot of issues down the road. So due diligence is a big process. Once we know that the land is for sure like something that we want to move forward with, then we negotiate, right? Like we have the property. A lot of times we'll say, well, maybe we want to renegotiate because we found something on the land, which happens all the time. But then you lock it down, you buy it, and then you move forward with our phased approach. Most of the time, my land development projects are phased, meaning that I do like a zoning first, zoning amendments if I have to, and then I do the site plan. I know a lot of people say, why would you do a zoning amendment and a site plan separately? Because there's a lot of risk. There is a ton of risk. And it allows me to exit at any point. So I could essentially change the zoning, raise the value of that property because I've upzoned it, and I could now sell it for a profit at that point in time, or I can proceed to phase 2, which would be the full site plan, the entire report, everything that has to happen to get the approval, and now I can exit at that point too. So there's many options available.
Can you share timelines with each of these steps? So, you know, when you're doing your due diligence, roughly on average, like what's the contract that you've got it, you know, under contract for,
Yeah.
and then zoning and all that good stuff?
For sure. So commercial is very different than residential. A lot of ours are commercial properties. And so with commercial, it is very, very common to ask for 4, 5, 6 months of due diligence period or conditional period. So most of the time we're getting roughly around that, 4 to 6 months just to complete it. And it makes sense because these reports take time, you know, so like a geotechnical or an environmental, they literally have to drill into the ground a few feet down, and then they have to send the soil to the science lab to get it analyzed, and then the report has to come back. So those things take time. It's not something that is very quick. Even sometimes the surveyor could take 4 weeks just to get out there. So it is very, very common. Also in the development world, because everybody knows these things, these reports take time, I don't really get a lot of backlash on asking for 4 to 6 months conditional period. So that's usually around that conditional period. For zoning amendments, we're looking at probably anywhere between 6 to 8 months. With COVID, I had one of my projects delayed 12 months, like in total taking me 12 months. I lost four months because the city closed. So that was something totally unexpected. But luckily, all of our properties have like an actual asset, like a property on it. They're fully tenanted, they carry themselves. So it wasn't a really big deal for us to carry it. But you're looking about 6 to 8 months for zoning, and probably about $60,000 to $70,000 for the zoning component of it. When you move to the next phase, which is site plan, it's another 6 to 8 months, because both the zoning amendment and the site plan is a hearing process. So when you submit, you guys might see those big signs at the front of the lots, and it basically says the proponent or the applicant is proposing to build this and such and such. It's open for the neighborhood and for the community to contest it or to support it as well. So there is that hearing period that has to happen in order for that approval to happen. So you're looking at another 6 to 8 months for a site plan, and you're looking about the same. You're looking anywhere between $60,000 to $100,000 to submit for a site plan. So you can see, you know, our due diligence, you know, we're looking at 30, 40, 50. Zoning amendment, you're looking at another $70,000, $60,000, $70,000. Site plan, you're looking at another $60,000 to $100,000. So again, not for the faint of heart, but the outcome is completely different.
Yeah, it's a lot of money up front and a lot of time as well. So how do you finance these deals? Like I'm sure you're very wealthy, but what's the plan behind it? How do you support like all these?
Well, you know what, Francois, like at the beginning, my husband and I were funding all of this ourselves. But again, we were doing 6-plex, 8-plex, 12-plex, smaller type of development. Then we moved, actually with COVID, funny enough, we moved into like super high gear, and COVID has actually been like the most busiest time for us. Surprisingly, I don't even know, because deals came up that people were just not looking at it, or maybe because I'm looking at it in a development eye, and other people would see it as, this is an ugly, crappy triplex. Why would I buy this thing? And for me, I'm like, oh my God, it's like 300 meters from the station. This is amazing. This is a gold mine. So, but because the projects got bigger, I started working with investors. And this was only back in 2020 when COVID hit, and we started essentially working with some investors. So we do what our accountant calls debt investment, meaning that we use our investors' money to finance the debt, basically to do all this work, to acquire the property, to do all the reports. So yeah, we give all of our investors positions on our properties. We pool all their money to buy the assets, so they're essentially our bank. And then for the soft costs, either my husband and I will fund that ourselves, or we use other investors to fund it, and we give them a percentage.
Thanks for listening to the REITE Club podcast and joining our community of real estate investors online at thereiteclub.com, where the focus is about helping you grow. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks from your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.